Now, I love moth orchids, but after a while you'll probably find that they start to look a little bit tatty. They might still be in flower, and they get loads and loads of aerial roots popping out of the top of the compost and growing all over the place. And the temptation is to cut those off, those aerial roots, and to discard them. But the plant is just trying to tell you something. When it starts to be growing in a pot like this sort of size, and it's popping out of the top and the roots are spilling out, it means that it doesn't really like it in the pot, and it's trying to find somewhere where its aerial roots will be a lot happier. So that's the stage really where you need to knock it out of the pot, knock away all the old bark type compost from around the roots, and get set to repot it in some fresh stuff so it doesn't keep trying to escape. You'll also find that the orchids are growing in these clear pots, and that's really important because those clear pots let light through onto those aerial roots, and you'll see if you wet them or if you soak them that those aerial roots go green, and that green coloration rather than the silver colour suggests that the plant roots are taking up enough moisture to keep them happy. So let's get on and start trying to pot up this old, sad, neglected orchid. So the first thing to do is to check to see whether there are any roots on the base of the plant that have either become damaged, like this one has snapped off here, and we can take that one off completely. Cut right back with a sharp pair of secateurs, right down back to the main trunk of the plant, and cut it off nice and cleanly, and then check round to see if there are any that are discoloured or gone completely pale and wizened. Most of these look okay. This little one in here doesn't look too good, so snip that one right back to the base. And you'll also see that I've had this orchid soaking in some water in this pot, soaking really to try and get those roots to come back nice and green so that they're really in a good state, ready to repot this plant. And you'll find that even after just a few days, these leaves will start to perk up and look a lot better. So I've been out and I've bought another clear pot. So the original pot that this was in was this smaller one here, and I've gone up one stage, just slightly larger, and I'm just going to offer up all these aerial roots, tucking them all together, and offer them up into that pot. Now you don't need to worry too much about getting them in, just make sure that they're nice and pliable to get them into that pot, and that's going to really accommodate those aerial roots really nicely. And you can see through the sides of the pot, you can see those aerial roots, and this clear pot allows light through onto those aerial roots so that they can stay really healthy. So I'm just going to start by popping a little bit of this mixture into the bottom. Now this is specific orchid compost. It's got a lot of bark in it, composted bark, and that means that it's not compressible. It will stay nice and open and aerated, which is really important. So I'm just popping a little bit of the bark in the bottom just to stop the roots poking out through the bottom. Then I'm going to do that wrapping process that I did before, carefully wrapping those aerial roots round and round. If they're tucked in the centre of the compost, it won't matter, because you'll find that those aerial roots will gradually make their way round to the edge of the pot again. And I'm just going to pop those roots in. It might be like trying to get spaghetti into a pot, but it's actually really, really beneficial to do this. And I've tucked all of those aerial roots into that pot nice and carefully. And you can see that they're all sitting there nicely, and the plant is going to sit so that the aerial roots are all below the level of the compost and the leaves are sitting above it. So now all that remains for me to do is to feed some of this compost in around those roots, put a little bit of it into the pot and shake the pot, and you'll find that that compost will just wiggle its way down between the roots, between those aerial roots. And here we are again, come back round to this side again, poke a little bit more in here, then give the pot a wiggle and a tap perhaps, and you'll find that being really gentle, you can get that compost in around those roots. You'll notice that I haven't used my fingers to firm this compost in position. That's not necessary at all. Just the last few taps and that orchid is repotted and ready to go. Now the good thing about this is that when I took this plant apart, it was such a big plant that I managed to find that it had produced an offset on the side. It had actually escaped right out of the pot. We got this really nice strong offset that I was able to cut from the parent plant. So I'm going to pop this into the original old pot to make good use of this one. So here's our original old pot that they were both sitting in. Little bit of compost in the bottom again. Feed those roots in to that pot, wrapping them round on themselves, being careful not to snap them, feeding as many of them as you can into that pot, and then we'll do the compost wiggle again, putting a little bit of compost in around the edges of the pot and a little bit more in, so that that wiggles the compost in between the roots to give them support. Quick tap, a little bit more compost around there, quick tap, and there we are. That plant is quite nice and stable. Even if it is a little bit floppy, don't worry too much about it, because those aerial roots will continue to grow round and round inside the pot and they will secure themselves. Now the only thing that remains to do is to give these a thorough soak so that the compost is thoroughly wetted, and that will make the roots establish quite quickly, and then we'll get off to a flying start. Bend the leaves back down a little bit, the ones that have become curled, so that they can be presented to the sun and the light and get some good daylight. And you can see that that little offset looks quite good. Here's the original parent plant here. We can do that same bending, carefully bending the leaves over so that they're presented to the light. And we've got two plants for the price of one that we can put back on our windowsill and enjoy. So there you go, really easy thing to do, looking after your orchids. Even if they don't grow large and produce an offset, then it's always a good idea to repot them into some fresh compost every 2 to 3 years to keep them really happy.